Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order, the regular meeting of the Audit Committee and the Board of Retirement and Board of Investments. The time is, I'm sorry. Oh, I thought we were recording. Sorry. That's what it said. I get a do-over. Right. Very good. Good morning. I am calling the regular meeting of the Audit Committee and Board of Retirement and Board of Investments to order at 6:02 a.m. 9:02 a.m.
You're on the east
and
side.
Right? 9:02 a.m. All right. So let's now go to our Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody stand. Place your hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Turn over the roll call to Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair Jones. This meeting is being conducted both in person and is a virtual meeting. So I will do a roll call for the trustees to confirm attendance. From the Audit Committee, just letting you know, Mr. Jason Green it will not be participating in the meeting today. Mr. Jones, Patrick Jones. Here. Sean Kehoe. Keith Knox.
I'm here.
Antonio Sanchez. Gina Sanchez. Here. Chair Onyx Jones.
Here.
From the Board of Retirements, Alan Bernstein. Vivian Gray. Elizabeth Greenwood. JP Harris. Ronald Oakham. Les Robbins. Herman Santos. From the Board of Investments, Herman Santos. Joseph Kelly. David Green. And David Rue. Staff participating in the meeting include CEO Santos Kryman, Deputy CEO Luis Lugo, AEO Laura Guglielmo and JJ Popovich, Chief Counsel Steve Rice, and all division managers. Internal audit staff include Richard Bendel, Leisha Collins, Christina Logan, Christina Sun, Nathan Amick, George Lundy, Gabriel Tafoya, and Kimberly Hines. Consultants include Jean Young and Amanda Kronk from Plant Moran, Audit Committee Consultant Robert Griffin. Trustees, if you would like to be placed in the queue, please use the Zoom raise your hand chat option. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until we are ready to speak. And now we may proceed with the agenda.
Thank you. Okay, item number 3, procedure for teleconference meeting attendance under AB 2449.
No requests for just cause for emergency circumstances have been received.
Thank you so much. Can I have a motion for the approval of the minutes?
So moved. Okay, Mr. Jones, Patrick Jones.
Yes. Aye.
Okay, Mr. Sean Kehoe.
Aye.
Keith Knox.
Aye.
Antonio Sanchez. Gina Sanchez.
Yes.
Chair Onyx Jones.
Yes.
Okay. The motion passes.
Very good. Do we have any public comment?
And no public comment at this time.
All right, so we're going to move on to our non-consent items. But before I do that, I would like to request that we pull items from the report. There was one item A, which is the audit plan status report. I'd like to place that before the non-consent items.
And Madam Chair, I'd also like to discuss item G on the reports too, but we
Very
can do
good.
that whenever it's appropriate.
Thank you.
Good morning,
Good
Madam
morning.
Chair and trustees. Here we have the audit plan status report. This is for the period of June 30, 2022 through May 15th, 2023. Next slide, please. Here we have our 15 completed projects for that time period. The 4 at the top there, those are the most recently completed as of after our most recent March meeting. The remaining 11 projects are those that we have reported to you throughout the year. Please note that 4 of the 11 are not from this fiscal year 2023, but from the previous fiscal year ending in June 30, 2022.
4 of the 15, right?
Yes, 4 of the 15. Next slide, please. Here we have our 13 perpetual projects. These are always continuous and ongoing. They are up to date, current, and progressing as planned. I like to call these our zombie projects. They never die, and they're always picking at your brain. Next slide, please. These are our audit projects that we are currently in progress. One, the LACERA Rehired Retirees is on the verge of completion. We have another 6 that will be completed in June, and then the remaining 3 in the first quarter of fiscal year 2024. Next slide, please. And these are the 8 projects that internal audit has yet to commence. It looks like we're planning to start 3 of them this month in June. 4 of them are being considered to roll over to the 2024 audit plan. And the last one there, the SSNVS, that has been transitioned to the Benefits Protection Unit, and they will be performing that process. So this slide here is a graphical representation of the previous slides. The bar graph notes the status of the current projects. As you could see, 15 completed, 13 continuous, 10 in progress, 8 pending. The pie chart on the right represents the in progress and our plans on when we will be completing them. As you can see, a majority of them should be completed in May and June. Next slide, please. And here is our percentage of completion. So taking together the 11 completed projects for this fiscal year audit plan, as well as the 13 continuous and current, we're at a 57% completion rate. We have 10 projects pending, giving us a tentative completion rate of 81% by the time we are done. And then of course we have the 8 remaining projects that we have not started, with some rolling over, some being removed, and some being transitioned to a different unit within the organization.
I have a question on that. What is the trend on that in terms of project completion, or are we doing things so differently that it's not really comparable?
I think the trend is upward for sure. We're becoming more efficient, more effective in completing projects. I think we also need to be more realistic, as we'll talk about when I talk about the audit plan for fiscal year 2024.
Great.
But certainly, yes.
Thank you.
I'd also like to add too that we put in a lot of work from a structural level. Richard and the management team and internal audit putting a lot of more structure around how we perform the audit. So there was a little bit of, I don't want to say growing pains, but just doing things new and different. But now we have a more aligned, methodical approach at times. Not that we weren't methodical before, but
it's working on
improvement,
the effectiveness and quality of audit work. So
yeah. Next slide, please. This slide here is in regarding the 23 recommendation that we received as part of our external quality assessment. We have implemented 8 of them. The most recent one was the revised operations manual. That leaves 15 remaining, and we broke those out into 2 categories, 7 being prioritized as foundational recommendations, and we plan to have them completed by December of this year. And the remaining 8 are related to the strategic plan, and that's in the process as well. It's going to take a little bit more time than the foundational ones, but we're working on those. Next slide, please. This slide here shows the advisory work that we perform. This is generally us taking part in cross-functional teams throughout the organization where we advise on process, procedure, and controls. I mean, we also advise in other areas, but that's our main focus when taking part of these advisory teams. And if you don't have any questions, or if you have questions, please.
Do I have any questions from the trustees? I do have one comment, and I know we'll probably discuss it when you discuss the next report, but on page 5 of your presentation, one of the items that is recommended to roll over to the fiscal year 2024 audit plan is the termination of access. And, you know, I was speaking with some of the staff earlier this week, and I just wanted to highlight that this is an important area. Obviously, not just for when staff, when they leave the organization, their access is terminated from the network, but there's also sometimes lots of other logons that are virtual. They're, you know, there are different systems or services that LACERA has engaged with. And so, as well as credit cards, you know, the whole gamut. And so what I did learn was that some of this will be addressed in different audits. And I just want to make sure that as you're developing the audit plans, this termination of access is considered relevant in those different pieces so that it's still being looked at, you know, this next year. And then we can do, I guess, a full audit for this at a future date. So that was just my recommendation to the staff.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you so much. So now we will go back to the non-consent items, which is the fiscal year ending June 30, 2024 audit plan.
I'll say officially, good morning, Chair Jones and trustees. I don't have a presentation for this item, but you have the memo along with the 2 attachments. One is the attachment A, the final proposed audit plan that we're seeking your approval on for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024. Attachment B was our wish plan, if you will, but due to our current staffing level, we redlined the projects that we elected on a risk basis to remove from the plan, including that termination of access one that you just mentioned. And as you alluded, we'll be looking at that in the various audits, looking at access controls as we do the different audits. And we can also consider that one of our CAP tests. We brought you a draft of this audit plan to your March meeting, which included all of the annually required projects, the perpetual projects and those that we deemed necessary for conclusion based on cyclical need. An example of cyclical need are the RFPs that come up, seem like they come up more and more often. We have the RFP for actuarial services, and internal audit does that because we hire the actuarial auditor, and at the same, it's just efficient to also do the RFP for the actuarial consultants at that time. We also have the RFP for your audit committee consultant. And I guess it's been really high RFP season for us lately with the recent completion of the financial audit RFP and now the SOC RFP. So at the March meeting, I informed the committee we would be performing our risk assessment process and asked for input from the committee. I followed it up with an email surveying committee members. We met with the executive office for their input and sent out our annual risk assessment questionnaire to all division managers with follow-up meetings with division managers as necessary. Most of the feedback we received, most of the risk concerns aligned with the top risks we saw in that on-risk document that I distributed, I think with the survey, and we've talked about in the past. That's the survey that the IAA does of top companies, 30 or 40 top companies throughout the country. And we saw that the risks that we're concerned about at LACERA coincide with those, including cybersecurity, hiring and talent management, organizational governance, data security, data privacy, organizational governance and culture, as well as business continuity. And so our plan is built around those risks, as well as risks throughout the organization that address the board's and management's overall fiduciary duty to ensure operational effectiveness and efficiency, compliance with laws, bylaws, policies, and procedures, protection of LACERA's assets, and accuracy of financial reporting. In alignment with our tasked responsibilities, and the plan is up in front of you here, along with our audit responsibilities and in alignment with our task responsibility from the strategic planning effort that LACERA underwent, we have provided 10% of our audit plan be available to allocate to initiating and defining the enterprise risk management program for LACERA. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. If not, please approve the proposed audit plan for fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Trustee Kehoe?
Thank you. So I appreciate definitely looking at this at a realistic lens on what we can look at. I see all the things we're removing are audit specific. I want to make sure that we're communicating with each of these divisions to let them know, hey, this isn't part of our audit plan anymore. So, you know, they need to be watching themselves a little bit deeper and not relying on audits to identify any type of issues and things like that. And also committing that with our quality assurance side for inline identification. There's things like the felony forfeiture. I see we're removing that from the audit. I just want to make sure that we're making sure that we're focusing in-house beyond just your side of the shop, but also on the operational side of the shop.
Absolutely, and we're not alone in the organization looking at these risks. We have we rely on our other partners in the organization, like the quality assurance division, the legal office, you know, all aspects of the organization. The benefits protection unit is our partners with us in addressing a lot of these risks. So yeah, we definitely will be talking to the divisions and making sure that you know, continuing to assess the risk in all of these areas, and we can always add something if something elevates to heightened risk.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'd like a question. What can you walk us through termination of access? Because that also caught my eye. So how are you going to, I didn't actually know that it was going to be addressed elsewhere. So that's good to hear, but I'd like to hear a little more about how that's specifically going to be caught and what will fall through the cracks by not making it a specific focused audit rather than one that becomes dispersed as part of other audits.
We'll do an audit in that area. It'll be pushed to the fiscal year ended 25. If nothing else comes to our attention that we feel like it needs to be done sooner. There are controls in place. Human Resources communicates with the systems division to ensure that when people terminate, access is taken away. I know there have been incidents where access to certain applications or is not terminated in a timely manner, but usually, and I don't want to say, but we believe pretty strongly that network access is taken away in a timely manner, and so people may have access to the pantry, if you will, but they can't get in the front door. So you know, we feel that the controls are fairly strong in that area. It's certainly an area that we do need to do an audit of.
So just really quickly, good morning. Termination of access is a specific area that is tested in the SOC audits.
Is that?
So they do a thorough analysis, checking network access, badge access. So
Another
that's
one
part
about
of it.
another one of our partners in assessing risk. Yeah, the external auditors that do the SOC work. I forgot about that.
And then I guess your other question, Gina, on Ms. Sanchez, on how it would get dispersed. So in the organizational credit card, we are looking at like termination of access for credit cards, right?
Mhm.
If someone had a credit card, when was the credit card access removed? I think for each audit where they have access to a system or something, we will be looking to make sure that access was removed promptly, whether it was a termination or a transfer.
I guess what would be helpful would be sort of a list of all of the access that people have, and then what audits cover that access, so that we understand where the cracks would be in that decision.
There would be a lot of cracks if we did that analysis, because it would only be, we'd be looking at it in each of our audits that we do. So anything that hasn't been or not being looked at this year, there would be cracks. But again, at a sort of macro level, the SOC auditors do look at that as well. So we have that comfort that they're testing it as well.
So they're looking at network access, Great Plains access, workspace access, and then key card access.
Yeah.
So I don't want you all to leave with the impression that we have these cracks in our harbor that it's kind of wide open and we don't have a lot of controls. We have a lot of controls in place. We have checklists. Human resources is very involved with the collective involved with the badges and we have key card access. All the systems, we have a checklist that they go through, and I know that when there's a termination, when I look at the information.
I don't think your microphone is on.
It's green.
Okay.
Yeah.
Continue. We'll assume it's green.
So we do have a lot of controls in place for a lot of these items. We can certainly provide you with a checklist from an operations standpoint. We'll be more than happy to share it with. I think you already have it, but we
could just provide it as a follow-up, just so that we're aware, because I recognize that some of, as you're saying, some of these would be covered in a SOC audit. So I just want to understand what's not covered in an audit.
Okay.
And I do want to echo what Trustee Sanchez's concerns are. You know, it sounds great if you have this checklist that has all the different software programs and the access for who has access for those programs, not just the ones on the network, but I do know, especially probably in the finance area, there's programs that you access for banking, for investment companies. I mean, there's all kind of web-based programs that are used, and they have, various employees that access it. And so the question is, if you look at it on a comprehensive view, which is what this audit plan would do, you could address everything from all aspects and angles and test it and make sure it's operating the way it should. With postponing it, which is fine, as Trustee Sanchez pointed out as well, is how do we ensure that the pieces in the interim are being looked at that are probably considered more critical, and just making sure that those pieces are being picked up. So, i.e. the credit cards or the banking, signature cards, anything of that nature. And I don't believe that these things aren't being looked at and aren't being done, but the purpose of the audit is to just ensure it's being done consistently and faithfully and being caught on all angles. Thank you.
Absolutely. And if I could just clarify to Mr. Kryman's point, when I talked about cracks, I meant cracks in the audit coverage, not cracks in the control system. I'm not saying that, I'm just implying that there would be cracks in our coverage of audit. That's all. Yeah.
Understood. Any other questions or concerns about the audit plan? I think it looks really good. I I'm glad that you're bringing a plan that you feel like is something that you can be, you know, more successful, because we did see the report from the previous year and you had a lot. You had a lot on your plate. So I think you guys did a great job accomplishing the percentage that you were able to get done. And it looks like you still have a good chunk you'll get done before fiscal year end, which is also really good. But I look forward to the plan for next year, because it looks like the things that you're addressing are really important and doable. So
yeah, I think from a capacity standpoint, it makes more sense. And we found too, there's a certain saturation point that the divisions and management has when it comes to audits. It's not like the Dickens play. Nobody comes to me and says, please, sir, may I have some more? It doesn't happen. More audits, please.
Yeah, you're not going to have that. Well, thank you so much. All right, so let's move on to the next item, which is our review and selection of the system and organization controls for our SOC auditor. Oh, I apologize. Oh, I'm so sorry. Let's go back. I was so excited. So this is a non-consent item. So do I have a motion to approve item A, the fiscal year end June 2024 audit plan?
I'll second.
The first and a second.
I'll take roll call. Patrick Jones. Sean Kehoe. Keith Knox.
Aye.
Antonio Sanchez.
Aye.
Gina Sanchez.
Aye.
Chair Onyx.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Now we can move on. Thank you. So the review and selection of the system and organization controls, the SOC auditor, and for the other post-employment benefits program. Do we have a report?
Yeah. Good morning, Chair Jones and Audit Committee members. Can we go to the next slide, please, Leisha? So Internal Audit recommends that the Audit Committee approve the engagement of Moss Adams to perform a SOC audit of LACERA's other post-employment benefits program, also known as the OPEB program, for the upcoming fiscal year, June 30th, 2024 through 2028. That would be a 5-year contract with an option to extend the contract for up to 2 one-year terms. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background about the SOC audit and how we got here. In October 2017, Los Angeles County requested the LACERA change its OPEB plan structure from a cost-sharing to a cost-sharing multiple employer plan to an agent multiple employer plan. This change allows participating employers to continue to pool their assets for investment purposes, but it now requires LACERA to have and maintain separate accounting records for each of the employer's pay-as-you-go costs. As a result of this restructure, LACERA is required to provide the employers and their auditors with sufficient audit evidence that LACERA has effective financial controls over its OPEB program. And we do this currently through a SOC audit. For the last 3 fiscal years, Plant Moran has provided that service for us. And as you're aware, at the March Audit Committee meeting, your committee approved the release of the RFP. So next slide. This was our evaluation team. We asked key stakeholders in the SOC audit process to participate on our evaluation team. InfoSec did participate in the development and the review of the final proposals as well. So next slide. This is the overview of how we came to select Moss Adams. Again, in March, you approved the release. Shortly thereafter, we distributed the RFP. In April, we received proposals from all different firms. And in May, we began the screening process. So the screening process was 3 separate steps. The first step was independent scoring by each of the evaluation team members based on the criteria. Then we had team discussions where we went over the strengths, any concerns that we had with each of the firm's proposals. And then the third, once we had the selected firm that we were going to be recommending, we had InfoSec review their security report. We had legal look over the proposed edits to the contract. We checked their client references, and then the evaluation team did interview the proposed team. And then we're here in June already. Next slide. So to attract as many firms as possible, we sent the RFP out to the top 20 nationwide CPA firms that have SOC audit experience and the Institute of Internal Auditors Diversity Partners. So that was about 16 different firms. From that, we got proposals from 8 firms that are listed below. The next slide. This is the evaluation criteria. We use the same evaluation criteria that was used for the financial audit. We reviewed all 8 proposals and found that all the firms met our established minimum qualifications. And then on this next slide, you'll see that these are the 2 highest scoring firms based on that independent review and team discussions. You can see that Moss Adams scored just slightly higher than Plant Moran did. Next slide is on proposed fees. All 8 of the firms, their fees came in the same general ballpark. These are Moss Adams and Plant Moran's fees.
Question for you. If you go back 1 slide, please. I'm confused slightly by, or what's the distinction between the other that Moss articulated and then the other that Plant Moran didn't?
So Plant Moran doesn't have an other fee. They don't charge us this overhead administrative fee. Moss Adams has a other fee, which is like an administrative fee. It's related to postage, copying,
okay,
that sort of thing, and it's capped.
The law firm fee structure.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Does anyone else? Okay, so firm diversity, equity, and inclusion. We looked at all 8 firms' diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. We evaluated them based on these 3 criteria right there. And Moss Adams and Plant Moran both met the requirements. Below that is a depiction based on their self-reported demographics, based on gender and then race. Next slide. So you can see in this side-by-side comparison that both Plant Moran and Moss Adams, they both possess the skills, the experience necessary to perform this work, but the evaluation team is recommending the selection of Moss Adams. We felt that their team experience and audit approach was slightly stronger. In addition, the key stakeholders to the SOC audit process are comfortable at this point with making the switch to a different firm. So, and then the next slide, this is our analysis of Moss Adams. So some of the strengths that I wanted to highlight is just they have extensive experience providing financial audit services to peer public retirement systems. They have had a significant amount of SOC experience. They've been doing this since 2003. They have over 100 professionals dedicated to SOC work. Our proposed team has extensive SOC experience, and they had a detailed audit approach and methodology, which included a strong transition plan. Some of the concerns that we discussed with Moss Adams was they did have a limited experience providing SOC services to public retirement systems. However, they do have extensive experience just with governmental agencies. It should be the same type of controls. So we are comfortable that their experience is going to translate. And then transitioning to a new SOC audit provider, anytime you're transitioning audit firms, it's a lot of work. They recognize that, and they did suggest that we have an interim test period to ensure that no surprise issues come up. And then on the next slide, this is our proposed Moss Adams SOC team. If you go through their bios, you can see that they all have a substantial amount of SOC experience, both in public and private sector. And then the next slide, it's just, this is the conclusion. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Other questions?
I have two.
Yes.
So 2 questions in reviewing the deck. So you mentioned kind of a new perspective, you know, besides them being literally new. Was there anything in the conversation as it related to how they would approach the audit, or, you know, based on their experience that you felt was like material from a new perspective standpoint?
I don't believe there was anything of that nature necessarily.
Okay.
We may see some of that when they start doing the work. They may overturn rocks from a different angle and see some different things, but that's generally how what we expect from new auditors. Yeah. Okay,
fair enough. And then secondly, in the transition plan, since you listed as a concern in your review with prior references, did you ask questions in terms of how good their transitioning is, or to get some expectation of time frame of what it takes to kind of switch up and then kind of be value add in the process?
So we did not ask their references about the transition plan. We did talk to Moss Adams when we interviewed them, and we went over their transition plan. So their interim work would begin tentatively around October. That way they have a big enough sample test period. Any issues that they encounter in October, they would let us know what they're struggling with, giving us time to rectify before their final test period, which would be in June.
Gotcha. And then can I have a third follow-up?
Yes, sure.
So, and I'm not sure, Christine, if you've been here long enough to where we've transitioned before. So given the, and this may be too strong a word, given the risks sometimes associated with transition in terms of slowing things down or over consuming team resources, things of that nature, could you or Richard kind of talk about kind of the plan internally to kind of facilitate as efficient a transition as possible, so it doesn't end up kind of bogging down, you know, if we were to approve the new group?
We always liaison well with the auditors, and we do that. We haven't transitioned a SOC. This is the first time we'll be transitioning. We started this just 3 years ago, the SOC of the OPEB program, but we have a lot of experience transitioning on the financial audit side. I think I've been here through 3 transitions, and you know, I think it's more complex on the financial audit side. It should be not quite as complex with the SOC audit. So I don't foresee any issues with that. We'll make sure.
I think internally we plan to keep the same SOC audit team at this point. So that should help with the transition plan, right? We already know internally what information and who we need to go to get it from. So that'll make it a little easier.
Right, thank you.
Any more questions from the trustees? I do have a few questions myself. So in reference to the reference checks that you did for Moss Adams, were there any entities that you called that were a retirement agency for reference checks, or did they not have any?
They did not have it.
Okay, so we would be there first. Got and understood. And then just a secondary question, which is really related to the scoring. I was just curious, for the third firm down, was it a large spread, small spread? Where did the 2 just kind of stand out amongst the whole team? Because I will say, congratulations, you got some really good firms who submitted proposals. So you had a great, what would we say, a great selection process.
It was very competitive.
Yes, it was. I know many of the firms you have on there, I know, and they're very reputable. But I was just curious, when you did the scoring, did the top 2 just stand out, or were they all very close together?
So I would say that with the 8, they all scored somewhere between the mid 7s to the higher 8s from Plant Moran and Moss Adams. When we got down to, we ended up at the half, right? Top 4 is where it sort of really stood out.
Okay.
So between Moss Adams and Plant Moran, they were the top 2. The other 2 were very close to one another. So it's kind of hard to say which was the third one.
Right.
But there was a gap in the team experience related to SOC experience. I think that's what really helped propel Moss Adams and Plant Moran.
Good. And then I'm sorry, one final question. For the employees from Moss Adams that were identified that would be on our SOC team, did any of those 4 have extensive experience working with government agents?
Yes.
Okay. And were they a part of your interview? Were they there in attendance for the interview? Okay.
Yes, 3 out of the 4 were there.
Okay, good, good. If there's no further questions, can I have a?
I'll move approval.
Motion. Second. Trustee Jones.
Second.
I'll go ahead and do roll call. Patrick Jones.
Aye.
Sean Kehoe.
Aye.
Keith Knox.
Aye.
Antonio Sanchez.
Aye.
Gina Sanchez.
Aye.
Chair Onyx Jones.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes.
Very good. Item C, which is the Los Angeles County's compliance with requirements for rehired retirees. Fiscal year ended June 30, 2022. And we have a presentation. Is that from Mr. Lund?
Good morning, Chair Jones and trustees on the audit committee. I'm here to present the Los Angeles County's compliance for rehired retirees fiscal year ended June 30th, 2022. The responsible division for this review was the executive office. This was an insurance engagement where internal audit provides an independent assessment on control processes to management and to your committee. This audit of the rehired retiree compliance resulted in a rating of unsatisfactory. We found the control environment continues to be unacceptable, with major non-compliance issues repeated this fiscal year from the prior fiscal year 2021. I might mention that our prior audit was issued 6 months before this audit had been issued, and that there was a limited amount of time for corrective action to be taken between the 2 years, and yet we felt we were obligated to continue through and finish this audit also.
Actually, even more than that, this year that we're auditing now had been completed. So by the time that other audit was issued of the fiscal year 21 year, which was we brought it to the committee in October, November last year, this fiscal year had already completed. So we expected to see the same issues. And it's a little unfair because management has done a lot of work in this area by working with the county. And JJ's team is now contacting members when they're approaching the 960-hour limit. And so we feel that we'll see some real benefit of those controls. The legal office too has been working in different capacities, both on the LACERA rehired retiree side and in addressing the issue with the Los Angeles County rehired retirees. So there's been a lot of management has taken a lot of effort and is very serious about addressing this. This audit was a little bit unfair because the year had already completed, so there was no opportunity to fix anything prior to us reviewing this year. So keep that in mind. Many of the recommendations are repeats from last year.
Thank you, Victor. A bit of background. We perform this audit annually because failure to adhere to the regulations and requirements not only violates state law, governing retirement benefits, but it could also jeopardize the qualified tax deferred status of LACERA. Internal audit received a payroll detail from the county auditor, identifying 381 retirees who worked as rehired retirees during the 2022 fiscal year. Our objectives were to determine compliance with CERO's 960-hour work limit, compliance with the IRS bona fide break in service requirement, compliance with PEPRA's 180-day break in service requirement, and PEPRA's requirement for limited work duration. Our audit resulted in 2 high-risk findings related to non-compliance with applicable state laws governing retirement benefits. We found continued year-over-year increase in the number of rehired retirees violating the 960-hour limit with respect to non-COVID related work. COVID work was exempt from the 960 hours limits. For fiscal year 2020, there was less than a 1% excess. For fiscal year 2021, it was 2.4%. And for this recent review for 2022, it was 4.6%. Some of the county departments indicated that COVID time card miscoding was a cause for the excess hours. Management has agreed with our findings, and LACERA's benefits division is partnering with the auditor controller to obtain pay period data in order to proactively control rehired retirees from exceeding the 960-hour limit. Their estimated implementation date is July 1, 2023. For finding number 2, we found that there was continued violation of PEPRA's limited duration language. There are 2 types of criteria for rehiring a retiree: an emergency, such as COVID, or the retiree has skills that are required for some task or project for a limited duration. At this time, PEPRA has not provided a definitive definition of limited duration. However, internal audit has the opinion that allowing rehired retirees to do the same work and receiving the same salary while receiving a pension benefit for over 10 years or even over 3 years represents an unnecessary risk exposure to violating PEPRA's laws. Internal audit has classified this as a high-risk finding because there are no restrictions, controls, or consequences in place to deter continued violation of this PEPRA law. Management agrees with our findings, and LACERA's executive office is working with the county CEO and Board of Retirement to establish guardrails and consequences for extended years of work. The estimated implementation date is June 30th, 2023. Staff and management are here to answer your questions if I can't.
Madam Chair, I've got one.
Yes.
So question, you mentioned no lack of, or kind of a lack of penalties or consequences for the abuses through there. Is there not a clawback provision for people who go over, and I guess they're technically double dipping, that their current benefits are kind of adjusted accordingly for violating it? Or is that only in kind of theory, but not necessarily in practice on that side of it?
This is more of a theoretical requirement, but we don't have the tools in practice. The legal office and the executive team are working on a proposal that they'll be bringing to the Operations Oversight Committee to establish those tools to be able to perform that clawback, but it requires some legal changes.
Okay. As a follow-up to that, then I would imagine then part of the strategy you may be contemplating is one, both to notify the rehired retiree that they're approaching it at some level, as well as notifying the hiring authority that's there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. We're doing that. And we actually are reaching out to the individual retirees at this point as well. Definitely doing that. And we're notifying the CEO's office of the overages for them to, it's very decentralized sort of approach in the county. So each of the departments has to be reached out to, and the CEO's office does that on an annual basis when we give them the results of the work.
So question, is the reputational risk more to us that this is happening, or is the kind of reputational risk, if double dippy is considered one, is that one really borne more by the county and the administrative department?
No, I think the reputational risk is actually everybody's exposed to that, because I mean, from a public, headline news issue, we'd all be exposed. I think legally or plan, qualification, we're at risk. So it's kind of both. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Kehoe.
Thank you. So I definitely agree that 960 hours is a concern for multiple reasons, and it's something to be laser focused on and to resolve. What I disagree with is the focus on the limited duration side. With all due respect to internal audits, I don't think it's up to internal audits to define what limited duration is. This is a legal issue, legal term, and it has broad implications. It's a policy decision that should be discussed at this board, should be looked at across the range, because limited duration is not defined. It's not explained. It doesn't say what it is. Is 40 hours on a project in 1 year, year after year over 10 years, is that limited duration? Or is 960 hours in 1 year limited duration? There is no definition on it. It's quite frankly, it's a silly addition to this law that needs better definition on what it is and how it applies. There are building projects that take 20 years that some of these individuals are working on and putting together, and they're doing it for 10 years. Is that limited duration? I would say that that's limited duration if they're working on a specific thing on a specific project because of their skills and skill sets. It's also something that we can't capture within a specific division, because some areas of the department or departments within the county might have other requirements or different things. So each one of these has major implications. And when we're trying to put pressure on the County of Los Angeles on this issue, it may result in major unintended consequences of employees with an extreme important skill set that is providing limited time on specific issues to resolve problems that now we're going to exclude because we've defined limited duration as a certain period of time. So I think we really have to look at this issue. I think that we need to pump the brakes on us at LACERA, outside of us making a policy decision with the board on telling the county that these things are limited duration when there is no actual definition in the law of that. Now, if the legislature wants to fine tune that, tighten that up, explain what that is, put actual things, 960 hours, very clear. We know what that is. Limited duration is not. And I think that my personal belief is that it should be up to the departments and the County of Los Angeles to define what those limited duration limits are. And it's not up to us at LACERA to do that simply based on looking at a table and saying, oh, you have X amount of people at the 6-year mark or 7-year mark or 8-year mark. And there is direct impacts. I know of specific impacts that this will have if we remove people from it because of the limited duration. And it's going to have a major impact on actual, public safety. This isn't just a pie in the sky discussion. This is people that have specific skill sets on taking apart phones and moving, things from one phone to another phone and being able to solve homicides because of their skill set that only comes in for those reasons, but might have been doing it for 10 years. And when we tell them, hey, we gotta get rid of them because of this area that hasn't been clearly defined, it's an issue. So I highlight that as external. It was my concern in past audits. It continues to be my concern. I don't think LACERA should be responsible for defining that limited duration. I do think everything else within the audit is accurate and is concerned and does have reputational risk for us.
I agree with everything you said. I think just to clarify, internal audit is not presuming to define what that is. I think that we're exposed, and we really have the fiduciary hat from a fiduciary perspective of LACERA with our plan qualification and protecting that. We need to make sure that reasonable limitations are identified because it's not defined in the law. And some of the things you talk about are, actually give me concern about succession planning. And what if that person that's got that expertise on that phone is hit by a bus? As the organization, so the organizations are exposed to headline risk and not having appropriate succession planning to have the people skilled to do that work. And certainly the appearance of, I don't know about 3+ years, as George mentioned, but certainly 10+ years. And it probably is around 3 or 4 years that you should be able to, if you haven't been able to have the succession planning, to have the skilled people to do the work and continue the work. Now, there may be extenuating circumstances that come in, but so that's the perspective that we come from, is really protecting the fiduciary responsibility of LACERA and protecting from affecting the plan qualification if anybody was to come in and look at that.
What you just highlighted are major executive management concerns.
Absolutely.
That should not be a part of an audit.
We're just making the recommendation
that what limited duration is. So although I might personally agree with what you just said, that is way outside of the scope, in my opinion, on what a retirement plan should be doing to the hiring authority and the elected and executive officials in that area, and also defining the side of this. So I really think that we are really stepping over our bounds on this one. We have limited duration that's not defined, and until it's defined, I don't think it's up to us to define it. Definitely not up to staff. I think it should be up to this board on how we proceed with those decisions. And I don't think that we should be defining what the law is. The law defines what the law is. So, and really, it's a judicial issue at this point if they want to clarify what it is. But I really think we need to step back on that. I might agree 110% on everything you just said, but those are executive management and elected decisions, not things that we should be defining. You should not be using an audit process to redefine these type of things. I'll leave it at that. We could sit here and have a conversation.
Oh no, I agree that it's a board decision and that it should come back to the board, and that is the plan. So absolutely, 100% agree.
I see that our attorney Chief Counsel would like to speak on this.
Yes, thank you, Chair Jones. Just briefly, in terms of what LACERA's policy is going to be and what their position is going to be, both in terms of our internal practices and our responsibility as a retirement association to regulate the employer, that is an issue for the Board of Retirement, and we will be coming to the Operations Oversight Committee in June with a proposed completely restated post-retirement employment policy for LACERA. And that'll start with your operations oversight in June. We'll have a discussion about it there, and then that will ultimately go to the Board of Retirement over the course of the next month or two. As far as legislation is concerned, at the IBLC in June, we will be coming to that committee with a proposal to have a legislative fix to make explicit the remedy for violation of the 960 hours. That's a first step in terms of legislation that we think is easy to take. We probably can get SACR support for it, and we are bringing that to the IBLC, and we'll be proceeding through the Board of Retirement's decision-making process on that issue as well. As far as overall context, though, in terms of the law, and this is an important clarification for this committee in reading this audit, important clarification for this committee to have. This is an issue in terms of the employer's conduct for LACERA. And the reason is that in PEPRA, the section that authorizes post-retirement employment states that such employment may occur without reinstatement from retirement or loss or interruption of benefits, issues that LACERA regulates, unless the requirements of the statute are complied with. Therefore, LACERA, in paying benefits, must be concerned about this issue. If we pay benefits to someone who is double dipping, we are at jeopardy, and we have the responsibility to regulate that issue as a retirement association and not pay benefits to individuals who are receiving benefits in violation of the PEPRA provision. And that's explicit in PEPRA. The loss or interruption of benefits, the reinstatement from retirement, those are issues for LACERA. So while it is true that the statute does not do a good job, probably for political reasons back in 2012 when PEPRA was enacted, in getting into precisely what the remedy is, and it may also relate to why they didn't tackle a definition of limited duration as was being discussed previously. Nevertheless, there is a responsibility that LACERA has to navigate through this, probably in terms of legislation, but also in terms of taking the law as it is and not ignoring it, but doing something about it. And what we've decided to do is approach this first in terms of what do we want to do for our own house? How are we going to make sure we're in compliance as an employer at LACERA? And that's what's going to be addressed at the Operations Oversight Committee in this month, next week. And then once we have had that discussion, I think that'll lay a foundation for deciding, well, what is the next step? The next step being, what is the policy that we as the Retirement Association responsible for oversight of this issue going to do in terms of a policy with respect to oversight of all participating employers, not just the county, but all participating employers. So I hope that's helpful. I already wanted to provide that context.
If I could just do a brief comment on that, and I agree with everything that you just said on it. I think my concern revolves around the fact that we're identifying an unsatisfactory audit of limited duration, yet we have not clearly defined what that is. So we are creating our own risk. And if this becomes an issue, especially if we're looking at our tax exempt status and things like that, and they pull these documents out and say, well, your audits determined that you failed this for the last, X amount of years. That's why I think that we need to be careful about defining what limited duration is when it's not defined and holding them accountable. So I'll leave it at that. And hopefully we can get some legislative remedies with it.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Rice, for your clarification. Before we go to Mr. Kryman and Trustee Knotts, I did want to say that I do understand, Trustee Kehoe, your point. I think the challenge in the audit world is your scenarios, for example, that you gave for limited duration that could extend 10 years may be acceptable in that one scenario. However, we don't know that that was the case for all of these cases that are 10 years plus, which were 50. And so it could be various reasons why. And I think from an audit perspective, if we as LACERA, the retirement agency, has ever audited for how we are adhering to this policy, do we have, clearly defined terms? Do we have practices that are substantiated with documentation. You know, there's a lot of layers that I think, as Mr. Rice pointed out, that we're going to need to address with this. And I think, as you indicated, starting in-house is a good start to kind of wrap our hands around it. But I agree, whatever we do in-house still may not be applicable for all the different agencies that are out there. But I do know from being out there working in the agencies and calling retirees back because we have a need, at the same time, the objective is that we find skilled succession planning so that those you know, retirees can actually retire and we get skilled staff to come in and fill those duties and those gaps. But I will move on to Mr. Knox. Do you mind if we go to Mr. Kryman first and then come back to you?
No, I'm here till the meeting ends.
Okay.
Take your time.
Thank you.
Had a lot of internal discussions about this. Hasn't just been, it's been since I got here 3.5 years ago, and we're trying to figure out the best alternatives to bring to the board. And we felt that looking at ourselves first and then trying to develop some sort of definition of what manipulation is and how that should be authorized, right? Because does the executive, for example, have the ability to bring somebody on board on a 120-day contract for how long? And then when do we pass that particular responsibility over to the board, where the board will decide, you know, yes, we really need it after 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and as long as it's needed. So we're looking at it from that perspective as well, and those are the discussions that we'll be having at the oversight committee, because it is coming from the county, those particular skill sets that are no longer here but are still needed. So at the assessor's office, for example, we had a lot of COBOL programming. And I couldn't find COBOL programs.
You got one right here.
but I think running the system was a requirement that we had to have those individuals there for decades, quite frankly. And so we're sympathetic to what the operation from the county side needs to do, and but we'll work through it in bits and pieces and do LACERA first. We provide the options for you all, and then we'll work through those things. I think it's going to be working, and then see how that applies to the larger. Maybe it does scale, maybe it doesn't. But those are the things that we're going to discuss. And so we're looking forward to the conversation that actually resolving this particular issue of our minds. If it requires a legislative remedy, then that's something that we're going to have to consider as well. And the one thing that I did want to mention is that Mr. Rice mentioned in terms of the clawback, we are looking at some legislative remedies for that, so that we can have some teeth in order to deal with the 960-hour issue.
Thank you. All right, Trustee Knox.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess a few impressions of my own, and then just some feedback based on what I heard from other trustees. You know, I remember sitting here a year ago being very concerned and alarmed at the number of, issues we identified in various departments, including some central departments that are the ones that tell the rest of the departments how to use rehired retirees. So I always find that ironic. It would have been helpful to have that context of the immediacy of this latest report, or the lack of time to address some of these issues, because without that, I read this thinking, what the heck, they're not making any progress. So, I don't know if there's a way to amend it to include that context, because otherwise we are documenting, as Trustee Kehoe said, these unsatisfactory findings. And without that context, I'm left thinking we are just continually unsatisfactory. And I guess I appreciate that LACERA is going to, you know, create some internal policies, but I don't know why we wouldn't engage the county through Mr. Kryman as to, hey, we're going to be working on this. What do you think? You know, it'd be nice to be aligned, certainly, and get their input. You know, Trustee Kehoe and I run in slightly different circles, you know, safety, central county department. And I didn't know what types of things that the sheriff's department may need from retirees, but, you know, I have my own anecdotal experience of seeing people coming back as a retiree. And to me, they're like a teddy bear. They're a security blanket. And it's, what are we doing? I mean, how long does this person need to be here before we cut them loose and let somebody else do something that they're going to have to do eventually? So I think it's a mix of both. I think when we create just kind of this allowance, we're going to continue to see the duration, and without duration being defined, I think people will just default like, no, it's still nice to have so-and-so around. And you know, we also created this kind of COVID exemption too. Well, it's COVID, we got to have these people around. So to me, it's kind of enough. You know, we need to make some progress in this regard. I would think that would involve more direct conversations between you and the CEO's office or DHR. And then again, I like the idea of creating, you know, some idea about duration or special skills beyond just, yeah, they've been around for a while and know what to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Jones.
Yeah, just another question, and I might be maybe a little naive in terms of the labor work rule perspective on this, but the ability, so really the issue comes back with the rehire is that the benefits clock is still accruing, right? If they come back, quote unquote, as a rehire or W-2, is the ability to bring them on as a consultant without some of the same parameters, is that not part of the flexibility, or is there something prohibited by virtue of the labor rules or whatever else from that happening?
They can come back as a consultant, a direct consultant. I couldn't hire Patrick Jones if you were a retiree. I couldn't hire you, but if you went to work for a firm and there was an arm's length, you were hired by Price PwC, and we were bringing in PwC to do a contract. That if you were just employed by PwC and not the principal that we were contracting with, yes, certainly that would be no, we couldn't bring people back as a consultant. That is prohibited directly.
Yeah, so Jones Inc. couldn't come back.
Jones Inc. could not come back.
And do it whatever else.
No, exactly.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Right.
I see Mr. Rice standing up because I did have a different understanding of that as well. You had to be careful even if they work for another firm. But Mr. Rice, go ahead.
Yes, this issue of work under a bona fide independent contract is something that is addressed in the proposed policy for the LACERA side. May provide a template for the county next week. I have had initial discussions with county council about this issue of bona fide independent contract. It's something they're thinking about as well. They don't know yet what our solution is going to be, but as soon as it's released tomorrow, I will share it with county council so they're aware, and we can have a dialogue about it at that time. And this is another area of ambiguity in the statute, but the statute prohibits the employer from contracting directly with the employee. That's an issue that the existing LACERA policy doesn't tackle, and we need to tackle it, and we are tackling it. And you'll see the Board of Retirement will see that, the OOC will see it next week. So that has meaning, and we have to define what that means and where do we want to permit people coming back on a contract that's a legitimate bona fide independent contract, as opposed to a contract that's a workaround, a way of avoiding the 960-hour limits. Because if you return on a contract that's bona fide, it's not subject to Pepper's limits, and they could work as an employee of a vendor as long as the vendor wants them to work on the contract. So this is an important issue. We will be discussing it with the Board of Retirement as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to break my comments up into two pieces. So one on the 960, I was encouraged that prior to COVID, it looks like there was only one violation or non-compliance. And so for a, extremely large organization. So that was really comforting. The other piece is I do know during the period of COVID, and it doesn't really highlight it as much in the report, but those allowances were made and we could bring retirees back and they could exceed the 960. And so a lot of agencies took advantage of that because we were in a period where we were, we had the great resignation going on as well. We had people that didn't want to come back to work because they found that they could work from home elsewhere. So a lot of requests were made to bring retirees back, and they exceeded the hours. And I do know that you highlight that there's some portion of staff that you were able to identify that said they were COVID related, but then there were others we didn't know. So my hope is with what you have discussed has been put in place to be proactive, to contact the agencies, to monitor the hours, that this number will go back down. But I do agree with Trustee Jones. We still ought to have this discussion about consequences if this continues to be a problem, because right now the number of hours is pretty significant in the last 2 years that have exceeded the overages. So it does need to be addressed, and we need to make sure that that goes way back down to what it was prior to COVID. And I also agree with I think it was Mr. Kehoe or Trustee Knox, I don't recall, who said, the report may have included a little bit more informative information, specifically. There was Trustee Knox. Yeah, I'm sorry. But at the same time, I support the fact that we're being fully transparent. It is what it is. These are the issues, and now let's address it. It's causing the conversation to come about. Mr. Rice just talked about all the different areas we're tackling, which we're doing that because we're looking at this information and it's clear we need to make some changes. And then as far as the limited duration, I won't harbor on that, but my question on the limited duration was that you had this this table on page 9 of the report, and is this something we look at every year? Is this new, where we just started looking at the number of years the retirees have?
This was a new
one. Yes. Very good. I like it. I think it is definitely something we can use to see improvements from one year over the next year over the next. So, thank you for this analysis, because it did make things come to light. And then the final comment that I would just like to ask staff to give a little more detail on, it does say that you contacted CalPERS. I'm personally under the CalPERS system. I do know they're having this similar discussion, but could you share what you learned through that discussion in the report? It wasn't you, I'm sorry, not specifically.
No, absolutely. No, I understand what you mean.
Apologize.
Would you want us to revise this report or include that in?
No. I just wanted you to share.
Oh, we can bring something back. And if you'd like us to add something to the report, we can add that language that reflects why that didn't improve. We could bring that back to the committee at the next meeting to address Mr. Knox's concern as well.
Right. I think it would be helpful. Are the trustees all in agreement with that?
Mr. Craven, would you be able to address what CalPERS has said? I think we know what the answer is, right? I don't think we need it in a written report. What was CalPERS' response on this issue for the limited duration?
CalPERS has legislation that they're updating their policy on it, And similar to what we're talking about doing, they have more authority over the agencies that are members of CalPERS. We don't have that same authority, over the county departments, but so we have to work with the county CEO's office. But CalPERS has proposed language that does define limited duration. So they are, and as we pointed out, I think in the previous report, there was articles in the Sacramento Bee identifying violations. So there is some headline news that talks about the concept of double dipping and the appearance of double dipping, and CalPERS is trying to address that through changes to their policies, and those are in the works right now. I don't believe that.
Well, we don't have those, or we've gotten no feedback.
We've got those. We understand. We have the draft policy that they put together. I think we shared that, and we can share that again. But I don't know where that stands in the process of them, finalizing those policies.
So it sounds like if I have a consensus from the board, if we take the opportunity to revise the report, number one, it would include the information you provided us at the top of the presentation that there was very little time for adjustment from the time this report came out and the previous report. Also to address maybe in a little more detail the aspect of COVID and how the rules did change for this period. And, I think you're very clear in here that, there was poor documentation of that through whether it was on their time cards, et cetera. But, that was a legitimate reason that employees could have exceeded the 960. And then maybe just briefly summarize the draft that's being discussed, or just acknowledging that draft is out there from CalPERS. Not to say that we need to do what they're doing, but it is clear that this is an issue, right? It's not just with LACERA, that, this is an issue statewide. Right. Needs to be addressed. Okay. I think oh, yes.
Just so it's added to the public record, just like Council Rice did as well. I think I drew out of the report that two things that were kind of also inhibiting the practice of this was kind of a data stream to us so that we could see it more in real time rather than in kind of retrospect. And then two, I know we've made an investment in, and if I'm using the right words, kind of an enterprise data system which will allow us now with a more current data stream to see these in real time from a management perspective on your side. So I just wanted to make sure part of the record that we also have a technology platform in place that can take advantage of the data and be helpful in trying to monitor and therefore manage this issue as well.
I'm not sure that we have that platform that you're talking about. We are getting the data though from the auditor controller.
Okay.
So I wouldn't go as far as to say that there's a platform for, is that right, George?
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
It may eventually interface to Workspace, but it's down the road, I'm sure.
Oh, okay.
We don't have that.
I can address that question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kathy. Yeah.
So we have started getting the data from the auditor controller on rehired retirees, and so we have a project plan to address it and do some proactive communication with both the departments and the individuals, and also on our member portal, give them some constant feedback on their number of hours that they're working, so they can have better metrics to move forward through the year. And also, and JJ can also talk about this as well. Oh, JJ is there. I'll let him talk about it. Is he there? No. Okay.
He's coming.
Okay.
I'll apologize. I went to get a drink of water. So yeah, we put together a plan where there are, I believe, a 90, 60, and a 30-day notice that goes out to the employee and the employer, letting them know that you're approaching, right? So, now there's a slight delay. So there's still a possibility of some overages because, the county payroll system is always 2 weeks behind. And then we get that data as soon as it's, put in the system. But they'll get that notice. And then I believe there's also on the 30-day, I believe it requires a call out to the employee to let them know. Now, right now, that's kind of going on now. It's being done by our process management group on a manual basis. What Kathy was referring to is that we're planning to automate that process so that those letters go out, without having to manually do them.
Very good. Thank you. Then I agree with Trustee Jones to have that information highlighted or emphasized, because you do mention it, but maybe emphasized that these are steps we are doing as we move forward too.
Yep. All that stuff should definitely be in the report that highlights that. Future reports are going to definitely be tightened up. I mean, future numbers are going to be tightened up. I think we're going to see that shrink as far as violations.
I do believe it's already gone away, the numbers.
Yeah, with the COVID ending, that's going to take care of a lot of it. But I think, yeah, we'll get back to the numbers that we saw before.
Yes, agreed.
And that really was efforts of the compliance audits that we did for a number of years prior to COVID to bring it down to that really low number, because we were reporting and working with the county CEO's office. And so, yeah, COVID threw a wrench in the works, but
right.
in many ways, right?
Thank you. So then the consensus is that this will be pulled and come back to the board. So we will not approve it as is. Correct?
Item 4.
Sounds good. Yes. Yep.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All righty. Now we'll move on to item D, which is the audit of disability retirement services business processes.
Good morning.
Bladder can't take it.
Good morning, Chair Jones and Audit Committee trustees. I'm here to present the audit of disability retirement services business processes. Next slide, please. This is an insurance engagement, and the overall rating is opportunities for improvement. The audit rating is based on the findings identified during the audit, which I will explain in a later slide. Next slide, please. So the engagement was initiated based on a request from the DRS management. The objective of this audit is for internal audit to evaluate the internal controls of significant DRS processes. We looked at effectiveness and efficiency, compliance with policies and regulations, safeguarding of information, and reliability of reporting and data. The scope was limited to fiscal year 2021-2022. Next slide. Okay. The audit results dashboard shows the audit objectives, the associated control attributes tested, and the results. Overall, we found that the effectiveness of the internal controls within the DRS business process are generally adequate and sufficient. DRS management has kept their policies and procedures detailed, organized, up to date, and easy to follow. Additionally, DRS management has continued to emphasize risks and controls, especially focusing on privacy risks and protecting members' data. A total of 3 findings were issued related to operational controls. These findings relate mostly to policy and procedures for processing affiliated disability applicants and survivor applicants. Management has agreed to the findings and will be working on addressing them from now through December 2023. The reason for the staggered implementation dates was done in consideration of the timing and availability of resources. In particular, recommendation number 2 has a 6-month implementation window because it requires cross-divisional collaboration to address 3 separate operational areas. This concludes my presentation. We would like to thank the DRS and the legal office for their cooperation on this engagement.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions? I don't have a question. I just have a comment, I think, or a recommendation.
Okay.
I think that what is being proposed for the corrective actions for these items are sufficient. But I do notice, though, in one of the responses for finding number 2, management indicated a target date of December 31st. Yeah. And I just am not clear why it would take that long to have those items implemented. I know finding number 1 is going to be corrected. Is it, did they say by October?
Yes.
And then item 3 was June.
Yeah.
But when I looked at what things that, which I think are great, that are going to, you have to update the online system, it looks like. So the online application reflects the changes that are needed. There's going to be questions in an introductory call. And then it also indicates that there's going to be this list that's going to be maintained. So are there things I'm not aware of why it would require December for implementation?
So I can't speak on that. So originally it was for October, but just in case there's delay with the policy being finalized during the October BOR meeting. And then the second part was mostly because DRS already has a lot of paper applications that we don't just want to toss out. So the new paper application will have these questions in place, but there'll still be a slow phasing out period. We're not sure when we're going to use up all the paper application. I think it was just, a decision point that something.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair Jones. My name is Frank Boyd. I'm the legal counsel that advises disability. Some of the changes could be made immediately. We mentioned the paper forms, and we're having a new case management system put into that we're implementing that will include these questions. Immediately, when orally, we can ask the applicants about the information. So that will stopgap the problem between now and December or October when it's implemented.
That's good to know. I'm not sure on the paper piece, unless, we're talking about thousands of copies of applications, but obviously encouraging this to be put into compliance sooner the better. Thank you. Any other comments? If not, can I have a motion to approve? Item D.
Second.
I'm sorry, who was the first?
So moved.
Okay, I'll do a roll call. Patrick Jones.
Aye.
Sean Kehoe.
Aye.
Keith Knox.
Aye.
Antonio Sanchez.
Aye.
Gina Sanchez.
Aye.
Chair Onyx Jones.
Aye.
And the motion passes to accept and file. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go on to item E, which is the third-party data security review.
Good morning again, Chair Jones and trustees on the audit committee. I'm here to present the third-party data security review. The responsible division for this review was the executive office. This was an insurance engagement where internal audit provides an independent assessment on the risk management and control processes to management and your committee. The audit of third-party data security resulted in a rating of an opportunity for improvement. We found opportunities to improve compliance with LACERA's contract policy requirements for vendor security reports. Third-party data security is a foundational element of vendor risk management. It addresses both cybersecurity and data privacy risks, which are two strategic risks all organizations face. We examined new, ongoing, and terminated contracts, high-risk vendors from July 1, 2021 to March 31st, 2023. Our objectives were, one, to determine whether the appropriate language, i.e. the data breach notifications, right to audit, the subcontracting prohibition, exist in the contracts for vendors that receive confidential LACERA business data or LACERA member PII, PHI. Number two objective was to assess LACERA's process for performing initial due diligence of high-risk vendors, performing ongoing due diligence of high-risk vendors, and ensuring confidential data has been adequately disposed of or returned for terminated vendors. Our audit resulted in one high risk and one low risk finding related to vendor security reports. There was an inadequate communication regarding non-compliance with vendor contracts. When required annual independent third-party security reports from vendors were not received in a timely manner. Management agreed with our finding, and they have a new system by Cobblestone ECLM that'll be activated in July 2023, which will automate the non-compliance alerts and management reporting. Our finding number 2, there was no formal procedure for the review of vendor security reports produced by independent third parties. Documented examination guidelines and retention of evaluation process steps for reviewing vendor third-party security reports is important for supporting an opinion of the vendor's ability to protect LACERA's data. Management agreed, and the InfoSec division plans to create a SOC report review checklist to document analysis and maintain the documentation with the checklist with the SOC security reports. That's the summary, and I'm glad to answer any questions. Or
I have a question.
Yes.
Why does the executive office have oversight of, rather than administrative services division as far as the audit itself?
I'm sorry, Richard.
So the audit, let me pull it up here. The responsible division is listed as the executive office, but shouldn't it be administrative services division?
I think it oversee, it's organizational. When we say executive office, it's organizational office / organizational. And because the contract managers are diversified through all the different divisions, so admin services certainly plays a big role. So does InfoSec.
Yeah.
So do I for the contracts that I'm responsible for. So that's why we put it under the umbrella of organizational. So really it's organizational more than executive.
So these contracts are not done centrally. It's not done through administrative services. Administrative services
the contract management system within administrative services. The legal office participates in establishing the contracts. They work with the contract administrator in all the different divisions. InfoSec reviews prior to going out the contract. They review the security, the SOC reports, and necessary pre-contracting due diligence with the vendors about their data security, and then the ongoing as well. So it's really an organizational effort in that regard.
On this case, I'd like to motion that we accept this report, that will be send it to the Operations Oversight Committee for review and consideration, because I think there's some operational things that we need to discuss.
I'll second that.
Okay, so there's support there. I just had a question on the Cobblestone. Sounds like this is new software.
It's a new vendor that Admin Services has contracted with for their ECLM system, which is for contract management life cycle.
And that's going to be implemented in July.
In July.
Do they know how long it'll take for implementation?
I understood it to be up and running in July. So
okay.
like that.
Okay. I think that obviously, I do know that.
I see Kathy's here. Perhaps Kathy can add.
Sure. Yes, of course. I just wanted to agree with you, George. Yes, that the implementation is scheduled to be up and running in July.
Very good. I do know the intent of the software is to help address these things, because I understand Cobblestone we'll send the warnings, the emails, the notifications. If things are missing, it will let you know. So hopefully that works out exactly the way you're looking for it to deliver. And let me know. They're on our radar. Okay. Any other concerns, questions, comments? So I think what I heard from Trustee Kehoe is that he wants to move to approve, but he wants to add on to this approval that this report be sent to the oversight committee?
Operations oversight.
Operations oversight committee. Do we have a second?
I seconded it.
Yes.
Oh, we already have a second. Very good.
I'll go ahead and take roll call. Patrick Jones.
Aye.
Sean Kehoe.
Aye.
Keith Knox.
Aye.
Antonio Sanchez.
Aye.
Gina Sanchez.
Aye.
Chair Onyx Jones.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you.
George.
All right, we're moving.
Cooking with gas.
All right, so now we are at section 6, correct? And we are at non-consent items. No?
Nope.
Yeah, so, sorry, moving on to section 8, reports. So we already had A, so now B is the Los Angeles County Employer Retirement Association Audit Committee Pre-Audit Communication.
Good morning again, Madam Chair and trustees. This morning we have with us our auditors, Pam Moran, specifically partner Jean Young and senior manager Amanda Kronk, and they will walk you through their preliminary steps to starting the audit, as well as the future timelines and answer any preliminary questions you may have. So, ladies.
Thank you, welcome.
Hi, guys. See you.
Good to see you too.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
So I'm Jean Young, and with me is Amanda. And again, we're just here to provide a overview of the audit process. So if you could move to the next slide. Really just going to highlight a few items. Again, we're doing our planning and getting ready for the 23 audit. So we just need to go through audit procedures, and Amanda will go into more detail. If you want to go to slide 4, I'm really just going to talk about the reports that we provide and the timing of those reports. So the annual comprehensive financial statement, the plan right now is that would be ready. We will do our normal audit procedures and plan and do appropriate adjustments to the audit as necessary, and with the intention of issuing in mid-October. I think right now we have a tentative date of October 12th. And again, we've been able to meet those deadlines for the past few years, so we don't see any concerns with that. And then in addition, as you've talked about, we also do what's referred to as the GASB 68 report, or the allocation of the defined benefit plan between the employers. And that usually takes place in March or April of 24. Once the final actual report and other information is received, we would issue that report. And then again, the agent report for the retiree healthcare is usually also issued around the spring of 24. So right now, those would be the main 3 deliverables that we would be looking at. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Thanks, Jean. On the next slide begins our formal pre-audit communication and the items that we're required to communicate to all of you on an annual basis. And we're just going to kind of walk through some of these items. Now, one thing I will mention as part of this process, we are required to send a formal letter, which will come to your inbox, your email inboxes shortly after today's meeting, but just a formal letter that will give you more wording on all the things we're going to cover today. So a few things on our auditor responsibilities. And as you can see here, our responsibility is to issue an opinion on LACERA's financial statements to provide assurance that they are free from material misstatement. We are also obligated to communicate any non-compliance to you with laws and regulations as your audit is performed under GAO audit standards. As part of our audit on the next slide, you'll see that we are required to brainstorm, we call it brainstorming, related to risks that LACERA, that exist within LACERA in your financial statements. Now, this is just a snapshot of a few of the risks that we've identified thus far. We are meeting with many people today to also discuss potential risks and And this list could expand based on those conversations. But as we sit here right this minute, we have identified these areas of risk, which are similar to prior years. So valuation of investments, particularly those that are harder to value and not available on a public market. Accuracy and completeness of the census data, both demographic wise, compensation, years of service, et cetera. And that directly impacts the GASB 67 or your total pension liability, and will trickle down into that employer reporting that Jean mentioned. Again, the accuracy of the payroll information that you're getting from the county. So we do procedures directly with the county to validate that the information you're getting is accurate. And then lastly, on this slide, you'll see a risk is the accuracy of the benefit payment calculations, payments to participants, and that does include disability. So our testing will select a sample and again, recalculate those in accordance with plan provisions to make sure that those are being calculated appropriately. On the next slide, I wanted to highlight just a few items related to our approach related to internal control. So during this planning phase and over the next month or so, management and those at LACERA here will be completing questionnaires and filling out control information for us to then audit. We take those questionnaires, devise and develop procedures to test the effectiveness of those controls. And we often will call them walkthroughs. So we take a sample of transactions and walk them through that entire process that was depicted to us. While we don't issue an opinion on this testing, we do often test through the internal control process to make sure that, you know, if there's any best practices or any areas of improvement that we could share with you, that's certainly a goal. We always want to assist in improving the process. Materiality, I know this is a concept that you're all familiar with. We do have a concept of materiality. So to you, that means that we are not testing every single transaction. That's just not a financial statement audit. But we are focused on unusual transactions, significant, certainly significant transactions, and then a sampling of the others. Lastly, we just wanted to highlight a new accounting standard that LACERA will need to adopt for its June 30th, 2023 financial statements. We've already been in some initial conversations with management related to this standard. And this is, I classify it as an add-on to GASB 87, which LACERA adopted last year, focused on lease accounting. That standard focused on physical assets and the use of physical assets. This focuses on information technology. Mm-hmm. So if you have a software that you're utilizing that is provided to you by another organization, or general ledger systems, or things of that nature, that's what this standard is focused on. So management is currently reviewing all of those types of agreements that LACERA is a part of, and we will certainly work with management. If it is material, certainly the impact will be reflected in your statements. But I know that that's an early conversation and management's working through that currently. But I did just want to point it out here that it could have an impact.
Yes. Just to make sure I understood that last slide. So is that trying to place a value on software as a service, or is it something different than that? So it's actually placing a receivable, or in your case would likely be a payable, on your balance sheet that says we've entered into this agreement to utilize this software from a third party, and we're under an obligation for a certain period of time. Oh, got it.
To use that software. Got it. Yeah. So it's kind of like a lease, but it was carved out of, those contracts were carved out of GASB 87. And the GASB said, well, maybe we shouldn't have carved them out. We need to scope those and look at those from an accounting standpoint and reporting standpoint.
And really it creates an asset and a liability. Yep. And what we found from a lot of our governmental clients, and especially our PERS and clients, is This may have a larger impact, but again, if it's not material, you don't need to implement it. And that was kind of the same with the leases. But I think what a lot of people are finding with today's technology, there's a lot more cloud-based or longer-term service contracts that this is impacting them more than owning a building. So I think that's just where there's been a little bit more work related to it than GASB 87 for some of our clients.
It's interesting. Thank you.
One other thing that one other thing I will add is this standard, which makes it different from 87, is only focused on the lessee perspective. GASB 87, you had to think about your lessee and lessor relationships. This standard is only focused on the lessee side. GASB said, well, the odds of you being a lessor of software is very slim. So they've carved that out, which in reality would be very slim. So it's just focused on the agreements where LACERA would be the lessee.
Any other questions, comments? I appreciate the presentation. I did have one clarification I needed on the slide that talked about identification of significant risk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as I read through those risks, those appear to be significant risks for any retirement agency, but are these things that you're saying you've identified through your work with LACERA that are high risk, or is this just areas you know that we should focus on because these are in general risky areas?
The latter. Okay. So, well, I would say it's a combination of both, if I'm being fair. So I'll address the second half perhaps first. So, you know, these are areas that are significant focus, we would argue, to all PERS systems, right? So you have most normally you have a large alternative investment balance. I mean, you're trying to, you know, earn the most that you can on your investments. And that generally lies in those alternative investments, which again, carry a greater risk because you can't go out to a published market and ascertain a value. Again, you know, benefits there's always a risk that they're miscalculated just due to the nature of the organization. And I would say that the one piece that is probably a little bit more focused on LACERA would be the disability piece and perhaps the county payroll feed piece. So I would say it's a combination of both. So we utilize our PERS experience, but then the audit standards do require us to get to the organization level.
All right, very good. Thank you for your presentation. We look forward to hearing back from you later this year.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Sorry, there's an echo. To, let's see, item C, which is recommendation follow-up.
Good morning again, Chair and the Audit Committee trustees. Continue. This is a quarterly reporting.
Oh, getting feedback here. Yeah.
One, two, three.
We've been going for quite a bit. Why don't we take a quick break so they can look at that?
Okay.
And we'll be back at, let's say 11 o'clock. Is that enough time? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I'm eating.
So looking at the overdue items, there are several, 3 that are slated to be addressed at the June, in June of 2023.
Yes.
4 that look like they're going to get kind of addressed by the end of the year, it looks like. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Yes, I believe the rehire retiree recommendations
Yeah.
will be addressed in the OOP meeting with what Mr. Rice just talked about, bringing forward the policy. The remaining ones were related to the HR's recruiting playbook, which is currently being finalized.
So the ones that I am specifically concerned about are the 2 items that regard Board Vantage and the switch from Board Vantage to PrimeGov. I think as a live streaming solution, PrimeGov is an excellent solution. But what I don't like about these 2 is that these are Brown Act issues. Being able to audit who has access to materials that are confidential or that are not public is an important capability. And it is concerning to me that because this was identified prior to this switch from PrimeGov, from Board Vantage to PrimeGov, that this was an issue that had to be reviewed. And in fact, we undertook an audit back in, I believe it was 2018 or 2019, in order to discuss kind of how we were controlling access to materials that belong in executive session and are therefore protected by the Brown Act. And the fact that we can't do that, and we didn't create a kind of bridge plan by keeping Board Vantage as a document retention and access solution, Board Vantage is clearly superior. PrimeGov is not designed to do it. If they are claiming that it was designed to do it, then a product manager should be fired. So, you know, I think that this is an issue that, and this is actually an issue to Santos Kryman and your team. I think that we have to address this now. And the easiest way to address it is to continue to control access to documents via Board Vantage until there is a reasonable solution. And if there is no solution, then that is the solution. But I don't think that it is acceptable to not have an audit trail as to who has access to executive session materials at any given time and who accesses them at any given time. That's important.
I believe there are controls over the access. It's just the audit trail capability that is a concern, right?
The issue in terms of the different audit trail, the difficulty that we're having is the quality of the reports. They're very, very difficult to read. It's not organized real well, and so we're in the process of trying to work with the consultant to assist us with developing canned reports that we could monitor. All the audit trail, the audit functionality has been turned on in all the systems, and so and we moved quickly when we realized that we had a couple of I believe it was 2 administrators of a specific system that we thought that did not have access to the system because we could transition it over to others to maintain. And when we found that out, we quickly remedied that particular situation. So we have audit trail. We're in the process of learning the system. We're in the process of trying to figure out that and how we could use this reports to operate from perspective.
So am I correct to what you're saying is, because in the report, it appears that the audit trails are not sufficient. But what I hear you saying is through a very tedious process, you can assess who's accessed the system, but obviously the internal audit division would preference we can run a report all in one nice, you know, layout and easily audit the access and who has, you know, been able to review these documents.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
I have a comment too. I agree with everything that Ms. Sanchez just said on this, and the entire transition was sloppy. We have, it wasn't even discussed at the board. The board didn't even adopt this switch. It happened. I've never been happy with the Prime Gov program itself. Board Vantage was far superior to what our needs were, but those type of things haven't been discussed with the board. I mean, we just made this switch. So this just highlights that we make the switch and we didn't even identify these issues, you know, or I think we identified it before, but we didn't resolve them before we made the switch. So yes, there's audit concerns about it, but there's also operational concerns about how this was done. And I'll leave it at that. I'm still using Board Vantage for disability cases, so that's how it is. So I'll leave it at that. It's much more that could be said about that, and not appropriate for the audit committee. But I do think that we could have resolved this issue if we would have made sure that all the proper steps were done before we implemented it, and made sure that we had full support of the board.
I do want to emphasize that when we did a lot of testing before we switched over to Prime Gov and tried to anticipate every possible problem area. You know, in deployment of any new system, you're always going to have some gaps that you learn about as you start using it. And so I don't want to make excuses, but I don't want to, you know, leave the impression that we just took the switch. We didn't do that. There was a lot of diligence that went into, you know, launching Prime Gov, and we understand, and we try to incorporate all the feedback that we received from the trustees before we did that. And as part of the user testing, acceptance testing, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of pros and cons for Vantage. Prime Gov has a lot of really good features for on the operations side that we thought were beneficial, and hopefully we'll be able to resolve all of these things. Right? In terms of the security features and the audit trails, we do have those things turned on, and so we should be able to come up with the reports that are meaningful and helpful.
The testing was not inclusive of all trustees. I know that there were specific, and I know that there were some of that, but and I do know that it's easier on the operation side for staff, but this is for trustees. this whole thing is for trustees. We're the ones that use it. We're the ones that use it to review material. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Giving you an
emoji. There's an emoji on the board.
There's an emoji on the board.
I did not use the old system for very long, so I don't have, I think, an opinion, but my concern is that if this is thoroughly tested and we can get the sufficient reports so that we can resolve this finding quickly, not by the next meeting, but have it addressed long before the next meeting. So when we do have the next meeting, you can share with us that it's been resolved appropriately and tested appropriately, I think is the issue.
And can I just have the last word on this? The issue that I have is that the two systems are different systems. One is a document access and retention tool for sharing documents in a controlled way. The other is an excellent tool for running live streamed meetings, being able to record votes in real time. They do different things, and you are trying to make one address both needs, and it is not working. That is the concern that I have. And I understand user acceptance testing. I gave you a lot of feedback, by the way. I was not shy, and I've never been shy about that before the switch was flipped. But what I will say is leaving a legal exposure is simply unacceptable. I understand that you may not, that you did user testing and that that some of it was great and some of it wasn't so great, and we could grow into it. But a legal exposure should always be at the top of your list of things that are simply a bright line. End of story. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sun. You can
Okay,
continue.
so if there are no other further questions, we will move on to the strategic recommendations. Okay, so these 19 strategic recommendations are carried over from the prior quarters and are tied to the strategic plan that is in the process of finalization. We plan to bring a more detailed update at the August 2023 Audit Committee meeting. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Do you have any more comments on the board? Okay. We will move on now. So we're in item D, which is recommendation follow-up of sensitive information technology areas.
Yes. Good morning, Chair Jones and trustees. Our IT sensitive recommendation follow-up covers the activity period from February 2023 through April 2023. There are currently recommendations from 7 sensitive information technology engagements and 1 category of recommendation in which we previously consolidated recommendations. For the month ended April 2023, the Information Security Office, Human Resources, and the Systems Division implemented 5 recommendations as follows. 2 Oversight SOC 2022 recommendations that address employee acknowledgement of the Information Security Policies and Standards Manual and attendance of security awareness training. 1 Oversight SOC 2021 recommendation that addresses review of mainframe user access. 1 Clear Skies penetration test recommendation that addresses password complexity rules. And 1 Tavora 2018 security risk assessment recommendation that addresses logical access. There are currently 24 recommendations in progress and 59 implemented from prior periods. Of these 24 recommendations in progress, 1 is a high-risk recommendation related to the Moss Adams engagement, 14 are medium and 9 are low. For the recommendations which are listed as in progress, the Systems Division, Information Security, and Administrative Services provided a summary of work to be performed and a timeline for completion. The Administrative Services Management is addressing the 1 remaining high-risk recommendation with procedures that have been drafted and are awaiting final approval, and expect this recommendation to be fully implemented by June 30th, 2023. We continue to work closely with the Systems Division to address recommendations timely and prioritize lower risks with the organization's needs. Staff are prepared to address questions in the committee may have, but please remember that due to the sensitive nature of these IT recommendations, we can't provide those additional details.
Thank you for your report. Do you have any questions, comments? I just want to stress that the high risk item that you guys, it sounds like, are well underway with a solution. And so we look forward to getting that resolved, but good work for those things that were able to get implemented during this period. Thank you for your report.
Thank you.
Item F, internal audit staffing activity report is just a verbal update.
Yeah, and
oh, sorry, and E, why don't we just do E and F together? Status of other external audit, it's not conducted at the discretion of internal audit.
Okay, nothing has come to our attention about ongoing audits in other divisions organizationally that are and not at the discretion of the audit committee or internal audit. Periodically, the legal office does have investigations that they perform, and they don't have any current open ones, but that's you know, under attorney-client privilege, they do perform investigations, but nothing currently. So that's all I have on that one. Staff activity, since our last meeting, Leisha Collins has returned from her leave of absence. So very happy to welcome Leisha back and have her with us. Sadly, or actually not so sadly, but we lost Catherine Ton to the investment office. She's gone on to bigger and better things. I hate to say bigger and better things because what can be better than internal audit, but But we really appreciate Catherine's almost 6 years that she had with internal audit and the marks she made and the contributions she made to the office. And I believe that she's going to, have great success and at the same be a great contributor to the investment office. So I wish her well in her future endeavors. So that's all on the staffing since the last meeting. And
Cover item G, ethics hotline status report as well.
I have a
comment. You have a comment.
Yes. So I have a question for Mr. Griffin on this report. So I look at this report and it would obviously be more appropriate in executive session if we had more details. But we have 4 counts of hiring irregularities that were reported to the office. So we're getting this information to us, but to me, it's not useful at all. I mean, all I see is that there were some reports that at the hotline. Well, what are they? Are they very high level reports, against high level individuals? Are they low level? Are they serious? Are they not serious? So if we're getting this report and we're being brought into the process and we have oversight of staff and everything, from a best practices, would it be better to have more detailed information, even if it is an executive session type report on what specifically these are? How can we do it without, I also don't want to overstep the bounds of the board on what is executive staff's responsibility. But on the flip side, there might be allegations made against executive staff that we as a board should know about. So maybe, can I get some thoughts on that?
Well, just briefly, we talked about this in our briefing, and I think you do need to have a vehicle where you can get the information, because this particular report to me seemed like a large number that just begged follow-up. But then that becomes a legal issue and how you communicate it. I know it's probably a vehicle, but it would be concerning, and I think you do need to have that process available.
So I don't know if it's best to have staff develop something and give it to us on a solution, or if we just provide guidance. Ideally, I think that what I would like to see is a synopsis of every ethics complaint that's coming into the hotline that we would be able to look at and then have a basic understanding. And then this committee could ultimately either direct or ask for follow-up if necessary, or we just take it as because there's sometimes that it's an upset employee kind of thing, or it could be a legitimate concern that we need to know about. But at this point, we got an information only item that's very amorphous, that we don't really know exactly, what these are. It could be serious, they could not. We're being told they're closed and they're not serious, but how do we know as a board? So staff, and maybe Mr. Rice, a thought on this.
I think the suggestion of maybe expanding the synopsis is a good one. In this particular case, we can say that they were 4 anonymous claims. They were anonymous. They were not. We always ask for complainants to step forward. This complainant or these complainants did not step forward. We always take claims submitted seriously, whether they're anonymous or not anonymous, whether they're submitted through HR or legal, or whether they're submitted through the hotline. We did take these claims seriously. An independent investigator was engaged, conducted an investigation over a lengthy period of time, and came back and reported that all of the allegations that were made, and there were a number of them, related to basically employment practices, were in connection with specific hires and specific individuals were not sustained. They were unfounded. And we report that on the hotline so that the anonymous claimant has access to that information, and then the file is closed. And this is the process we follow for all anonymous claims that are submitted via the hotline. These claims are not that different from claims that come in to HR and the legal office, that we always investigate and determine whether there's something to do about them. In other words, they're sustained or whether they're unsustained. This has visibility to the board because it came into the hotline, and we've committed. Mr. Bendel and I are co-administrators of this hotline. We've committed to report the activity to the board. I don't think it would be appropriate, given the nature of these particular claims, to say more to the board about them. But I think it is fair for the committee to request perhaps maybe a little bit more thoughtful, little bit more in the summary that's provided.
Trustee Sanchez.
So this went live under my tenure as audit chair. I think one thing that would be very helpful just generally is simply maybe an education as to what happens, as to how the hotline works, because I do think part of it is Trustee Kehoe is right that you can't necessarily, you don't know what happened. So I think an education about that summary you just gave effectively is essentially what happens with each one of these. So I think educating us about, who our vendor is, how they operate, what happens, what kinds of investigations, what an investigation looks like. I think that would be very helpful just so that we understand what happens and what the numbers mean per se. Part of the reason to have an external hotline is to protect an employee who is coming forward to make an allegation, to protect them from retaliation. And so the more you give clues that could reveal who that person is, will actually undermine the use of that system. So I do think it's important that we remember why these processes are put in place to begin with, is to protect employees and to make them feel safe in order to make an allegation that they might otherwise feel that they might be retaliated against. And so I do think that sanctity is important, but part of it is probably stepping back, as we should do on a regular basis, educate us as to what really happens. What do these numbers mean and how should we interpret them? Right. So I think that's a absolutely fair comment, but I do think we have to be very, very careful about the anonymity, even of folks who do step forward and state their name. We don't want anyone to feel that they cannot call that hotline in full safety.
And I agree 100%, which is why I wanted to talk about it on what comes to the board. I do think there should be a little bit more details on it. And I think the more higher risk to me is things that are allegations made against direct reports to the board. So, CEO or high level executives, those type of things should be highlighted. And then that way we know if it's a general staff member and things and everything that we know, we should have deep trust that that's being handled properly, especially with an outside vendor. So if staff could just take those comments without any objection and then maybe bring that back to the committee on how to.
I have a recommendation, but first I wanted to ask, is there a policy currently in place to address the hotline and the procedures, policy and procedures?
Yeah, we have a policy and procedure around the cases and the different decisions that are made when the case comes in and how it's handled. Yes, we can bring that to the next meeting.
Right. I think that would be important so that we understand the process that occurs. But then my other question, having had to implement a fraud, waste, and abuse hotline, and it is important that it's anonymous. However, I guess my question is for Mr. Rice, is there an ability to do an internal written correspondence that has some very generic summarized information so that the underneath the policy, right? You said there are certain procedures. So if the complaint comes in against an executive versus a department or employee, you have these procedures in place. But then we as the trustees can understand that this type of complaint fell under this category. of the policy and it was handled this way. Just so that we have some understanding and not just, you know, there were 4 cases and they were closed. So I guess the question is there an ability to do written correspondence at a very high level that tells us the type of categories that it fell under and how it was addressed?
Yes, I think that goes in line with expanding and refining the synopsis that's provided to the committee.
Okay.
I would like to make one other comment, is that we do have to be careful that this doesn't become an opportunity to campaign spurious claims against a direct report of the board, such that it influences trustees' view in ways that are unfounded. The whole purpose is to have somebody who is a professional investigator do these. And if we do not have trust in that, then replace them. But at the end of the day, trust is a big component of this. We do have to have trust in our vendors. So understanding, you know, how they do their process is part of building that trust. So that's really just kind of understanding what how these are maintained. But I would be very, very careful as to not only discussing, you know, creating information that might make the person making the allegation known, but also creating information that might kind of give a greater voice to a spurious allegation than should be given.
Absolutely, I agree.
That can be handled with proper policy and covering it with executive sessions versus open sessions. And ultimately, somebody has to have oversight, right? And I think that's where I think we layer the oversight. We decide how it is, and some of these things might not be appropriate for the audit committee and more appropriate for the other boards, right? But I think you're getting the picture of that we need to look at this, defining a little bit more, because to me, I have a risk because we now know about this, but you know, it hasn't been, you know, all the details aren't there. So I think we can tighten this policy up, and I don't know if it's, like I said, more appropriate for the audit committee or if it's more appropriate for individual boards to look at. But I do think we need to make sure we identify oversight and that we do bring things at the executive session level versus open session.
So I think that would be something that should be defined in the policy of identifying what scenarios would need to go to executive session. So am I hearing that we would like to have the policy reviewed? No. I don't think there's a consensus on that.
Education. Let's start with education and then figure out where we go.
Okay. So then,
well, I'm asking for the policy to be reviewed. So
let's start with the education, with the understanding that once we're educated on the policy, then we can make a recommendation at that time to decide whether we need to go further. It could all be in the policy and we just need to all be educated on that. So
I think a way to bridge this and bring it together where we can get some consensus is that we ask staff to bring that back to educate us, but also to review and to identify if there's any issues that they're going to recommend to make changes. And then obviously, if we see it and recommend changes, we can recommend our own changes. But in addition to just, you know, the education component, because I'm familiar with it. I mean, I'm familiar with it. But I think there's issues that should be tightened up. I like staff to look at that when they bring it, and then we can provide feedback as well.
Trustee Jones.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, if I'm understanding the risk that I think Trustee Kehoe is trying to get, trying to perhaps review the policy for if a allegation is substantiated, right? Because what I understand is the 4 of these were not substantiated by the individual investigator that we have that's trust. So I also understand that I don't really want to know about it then. If it's not substantiated by the independent vendor, then I don't want my mind polluted by all the issues that we pay handsomely for Santos to manage, right? But in the case that there is an allegation that's substantiated, then there's a process whereby, and I'm assuming this because I need to get education on the policy as well, that then if it were against potentially an executive member, then there is a process for how it would come to our attention.
That's all in the process.
Yeah.
That's all.
So that's
Yeah,
all.
understood.
Yeah, so if the concern was, and I get your thing, is that if there's an allegation being made against an executive or direct report, then you would kind of like to get an early look at it from an exposure standpoint. But I would only be interested in that if the process we have of independence and whatever substantiates it, then otherwise I'm not really interested in having it. So I think maybe the education process is good to have that first.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
So in looking at these claims, what I do is I do take a look at them, and I need to protect the individual that's making the accusation, and I also need to protect the individual that's actually being accused of some issues. So we initiate an investigation if we believe it's warranted, and we always do an investigation. We may use an outside independent. We may do it internally. It really just kind of depends. And so once we do that, the investigation is completed. And then if it's unsubstantiated, we report it the way you've seen it. If there was some allegation that was substantiated, that would go to the Board of Retirement or the Board of Investments, depending on which side of the house it falls under. And so that's sort of the process that we were following, at least in my mind, the best practice in terms of making sure that we're thorough in our investigation, that the board has the necessary information that they need to have, or are aware of any risk that to the organization. And so the timing is going to be really important as well when we start doing the education, because I don't want to be in a position where we get an anonymous complaint, we know who the person is being accused, the accused. I don't want to have a discussion about that until the investigation is completely over, right? So, but we'd be more than happy to take a look at the policy. We'll put something together to educate this board as well as the Board of Retirement and the Board of Investments, just so everybody understands what the process is going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Kryman. I think what it sounds like for now, when we talk about items then for the future agenda, it will be to bring back not just the policy, but also maybe a summary of the procedures, because sometimes procedures are more detailed than the policy, so that we can have an understanding of what steps staff does take to address these. I think there's a consensus there for that. I do hear you, Mr. Kehoe, that you want to expand on that to add a piece where then we could make recommendations for change. But I think we don't have a consensus in that area. So why don't we start with bringing the policy and procedures back to the audit committee at our next meeting?
I'm good with that. And I think the policy change would have to ultimately be through Board of Retirement anyway. So I'll just address the other one through the Board of Retirement. But I'm good with the education component here in the audit committee.
All right, very good. All right, thank you. So that concludes our items. So we can move on to number 8, which is consultant comments. Mr. Griffin.
Well, I think I just weighed in on the last issue. So I did go to Sackers and I taught, for everybody's information, since no one was there from here, I taught an accounting class that talked about things like those new GAAP pronouncements. So that was what I did when I got out of COVID lockup. So that's my report.
Thank you. All right, item 9, items for staff review.
There's no items.
No items. And then number 9, items for future agendas. I think we have at least 2, correct?
It was Trustee Sanchez requested education on the ethics hotline and then policy and procedures.
And then we're going to bring back item C, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
To the OCC.
Yes.
Oh, OC, I'm sorry.
Bring it back to the audit committee as well as take it to the.
Right.
It's the same item. 2 different items, right? Yeah, two separate items. Yeah, one's going to the operations oversight committee. One's coming back to the audit committee.
Right.
They were retirees coming back to the audit committee, and third-party data is going to the Operations Oversight Committee. That's right.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. All righty. Good of the order. Is there anyone like to?
I just want to congratulate Ms. Dunn. Yeah, it's fantastic. And you continue to populate LACERA with audit folks, which is a testament to your training. So congratulations to Ms. Dunn, and also by extension to you, Mr. Bendel.
Absolutely. I concur. Thank you.
Yes, congratulations are definitely in order. Now you have to fill another vacancy. All right. That being said, I think we are ready to move for closing the meeting.
So moved.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you.